Jay. Jay! Let's go. Jay!
Welcome back to Gen X Horror, where we talk about all things 70s and 80s horror and nostalgia. And today's video is going to wrap up the 1980s retro horror shot on video obsession I have had the past few weeks. Instead of adding one or two titles into each video, kind of sneaking them in there, this entire video is dedicated to the insane shot on video trend in the 80s. There is just something wild and romantic about the heart everyone had. People that can't act were acting. People that can't direct were 100% directing. And movies that never would have been made otherwise absolutely were made. For better or worse. And that's worth celebrating. To that end, we're taking a nostalgic ride through the 6 most beautifully janky shot-on-video horrors that belong on every serious 80s horror movies list, even if they make you question how any of these made it onto the video store shelves. And stick around to the end because we're doing a special deep dive on one particular movie that's so legendarily bad, the behind-the-scenes stories are even more insane than what made it to tape. We're talking drunk actors, live chainsaw accidents, and human skulls smuggled across international borders. If your tray tables are upright and your barf bags are close by, let's get into it.
I'm Tim O'Malley. I'm a detective. The story I'm going to tell you happened in October 1986.
Oh man, let's start right here. A Night to Dismember from 1983. This is a beautiful, regional shot-on-video flick and the perfect place to kick off this list of 80s retro horror movie madness. Director Doris Wishman's slasher follows Vicky, played by adult film star at the time Samantha Fox, portraying a woman recently released from a mental institution who returns home only to find her family getting systematically murdered. Or is she doing the murdering herself? You know, the movie's not entirely sure, so that's not even close to a spoiler. The theme of mental institutions plays throughout a lot of this list, and it's for sure an easy scapegoat for a serial killer. The plot involves a family curse, some truly baffling narration that explains things we're literally watching happen on the screen, and enough continuity errors to make you wonder if they filmed this in 12 different decades. In short, some wild choices were made, and while I am forgiving for sure, this one threw me, but you'll see why they thought they needed that narration. The entire movie was filmed without sound. All the dialogue and sound effects were dubbed in later, and here's the wild part. A disgruntled crew member allegedly, actually, destroyed most of the original footage, forcing Wishman to piece together what remained with new scenes and wall-to-wall narration that desperately tries to hold this thing together like duct tape on an airplane wing. Shot for almost nothing in Delaware, this film has achieved legendary status among bad movie enthusiasts precisely because it feels like watching someone try to assemble IKEA furniture with half the instructions missing. A majority of the interiors were shot indoors Wishman's house in 1977, and just to reiterate, this was released in 1983. In order to secure financing, Wishman made a trailer for the film using stock footage and snippet shots specifically just for advertising. A financial backer from Chicago agreed to fund the production based on Wishman's trailer, giving her what she described as quote-unquote a hefty deposit to finish the film, and that's as close as I can get to finding the true budget of this one. The final flick ultimately plays like a retelling of someone describing a slasher movie they half remember from 1982, complete with random inserts of gore that don't quite match the scenes around them and a twist ending that answers exactly 0 questions. If it was even attempting to, and I honestly don't think it was.
He saw Billy washing the mud from his face.
Now let's fast forward to 1985 and we get Whorehouse on Highway 5, and this one was actually dropped in the comments of another video. Another awesome shot on video oddity that perfectly captures the, man, let's just grab a camera and make a horror movie spirit of the mid-80s independent filmmaking move. The plot follows a group of college students who always seem up for anything that head to a remote area for some research project on a supposedly deceased German expatriate rocket scientist, and end up at, you guessed it, a creepy house where a maniac in a Richard Nixon mask is murdering people. Well, you might not have guessed that, but you did hear that right. Richard Nixon. I guess someone decided the scariest thing they can put on screen in 1985 was a killer wearing a mask of a disgraced president. And honestly, they might not have been that wrong. If you hang until the credits, you'll notice Richard Nixon is shown as being played by actor Ronald Reagan. And while it's not the Ronald Reagan we know, I think that's absolutely hilarious. Director Richard Casey shot this thing on video with virtually no budget, and most actors credited gave pseudonyms as they were working non-union, which gave it that unmistakable home movie quality where the lighting is whatever the sun happened to be doing that day, and the sound occasionally remembers to exist. The film was shot only on weekends and largely in the apartments of various cast members, and even though lighting should be key, a little too much footage was shot outside at night. The film features long stretches of people wandering around for some reason, a killer whose motivation is explained through the most confusing backstory involving Nazis and experiments, and a legendary segment where two of our actors engage in the wildest dance scene ever filmed. The movie was released by a small distributor and became a cult flick purely through word of mouth among VHS tape collectors who appreciated its commitment to being aggressively weird and largely incomprehensible, at least by me. Film critic Alex Cohen, interviewed for the Courier News, wrote the film is quote-unquote very scary and very funny at the same time, and we know that's one of the problems that most general film goers have. The Spectacle Theater noted in a press release, one of the most confusing and compelling homemade horror films ever made. And man, I couldn't agree more. What makes Horror House special is its absolute refusal to follow any conventional horror movie rules. It meanders when it should build tension, it throws in random comedy when you expect scares, and ends with a climax that doesn't even bother answering any questions, while raising about 17 new ones, making it a must-see entry on any 80s horror movie list worth its salt. And now we arrive at 1989's Things, and this thing comes up in the comments all the time, and I've never seen it, but when I started watching it, I was like, oh wait, I've definitely seen snippets of this. I sat through the whole damn thing, and it's a movie so incomprehensibly bizarre that it makes everything else on this list look like Citizen Kane directed by Stanley Kubrick. Canadian filmmakers Andrew Jordan and Barry Gillis created what can only be described as a cinematic accident. The ultimate shot-on-video horror nightmare about a scientist who helps to impregnate the wife of an impotent man with ant-like creatures, or things, I guess. So, there's the name. They burst out of her in scenes that look like someone dumped spaghetti and meatballs into a garbage disposal, bringing new meaning to the term spaghetti-o. The plot, and I'll throw up some huge quotes there, involves two brothers visiting their friend's house only to eventually encounter these insect-like monsters, while adult film star Amber Lynn appears randomly throughout as a TV news anchor, reportedly because she was in Toronto shooting something completely unrelated, and the filmmakers convinced her to film scenes in a hotel room for about $2,500 to get her name on the VHS box art. And you'll find out that's a huge part of the budget. Things was shot over the course of an impressive 4 years, with a budget of approximately $35,000, mostly funded by maxed out credit cards and hell, whatever money the cast and crew could scrape together, resulting in a film where continuity is a distant memory at least, and logic goes to die only to be placed in the freezer along with their tape recorder and an old notebook they randomly pull out of it at the start of the movie. The dialogue sounds like it was mostly off the cuff, hopefully at least. The acting suggests the cast had never seen a well-paced movie before, and the special effects look like high school art projects involving latex and grocery store meat. Andrew Jordan has called making the film the worst experience of my life, especially doing months of post-production with Barry J. Gillis. But honestly, here's the thing about Things. It's achieved absolute legendary status precisely because it's so thoroughly, completely, irredeemably bad that it transcends badness and becomes something, hell, almost mystical. A viewing experience so bewildering that you can't help but respect the sheer audacity of everyone involved thinking this was ready for public consumption, but man did I consume it. If you've ever watched those like grainy VHS trailers for obscure 80s horror movies and wondered what the absolute bottom of the barrel could look like, guys, this is it. And we're coming back to this one because the production stories are absolutely insane.
Duck's fingers. Oh.
What can you tell people about Truth or Dare, A Critical Madness? It's sublime. It's so great. The performances are not good.
No, they're not. Now we're getting into the really weird stuff with Truth or Dare, A Critical Madness, a shot-on-video slasher that answers the question absolutely no one asked: what if we made a psycho thriller but made it as uncomfortable and bizarre as humanly possible? This is named by Elijah Wood as one of his favorite films, and when he stumbled across this around the age of 5, it made him an instant fan of horror movies. Likely also an instant patient of a handful of psychotherapists as well. Director Tim Ritter's debut follows Mike Strauber, a guy who catches his wife cheating and completely loses his mind, ending up in a mental hospital where he's subjected to experimental treatments that somehow make him worse. After escaping, he goes on a rampage with a nail gun, a copper wire, a chainsaw, a machete, and whatever else magically appears in his hands, all while playing a twisted game of truth or dare with his victims and himself. The film is relentlessly grim, shot with that distinctive shot-on-video horror look where everything feels slightly off and dangerous, like you're watching something you're not supposed to see, like maybe a guy in a car driving past a kid holding a chainsaw out the window and cutting him in half. I mean, that's in there. Ritter made this for around $8,000 with his friends and honestly whatever equipment they could borrow, and it shows, but in that raw, unpolished way that actually adds to the sleazy atmosphere. Tom Becker of DVD Verdict wrote that Truth or Dare was a typical entertaining and typically entertaining low-budget direct-to-home video 80s slasher horror entry. It contains all the requisites: some nudity, lots of violent, some graphic, all cheesy, a masked madman, and plot holes so glaring it seems like big chunks of the film are just missing, but they aren't. That's accurate, man. The violence is surprisingly nasty, though, for a home video production, featuring creative kills that benefit from the grainy video quality, making everything look more brutal and real. Exactly the kind of content that made those VHS trailers so irresistible to horror-hungry teens. What's wild is that this became the first entry in a whole series of increasingly unhinged movies following this character, proving that even shot-on-video madness can spawn franchises, whether there was an appetite for them or not. And I'd guess aside from Elijah Wood, there wasn't. The film circulated heavily in the underground tape trading scene and helped establish Florida as a legitimate hub for DIY horror filmmaking, inspiring countless other filmmakers to pick up cameras and traumatize their local communities with homemade 80s horror movies, and that's a huge win for all of us. Nothing can prepare you for an opening scene like that. Man, nothing says 1980s quality horror cinema quite like a retro horror movie that sounds like it could be your middle school cafeteria mystery meat special. We're talking about 1987's Lunch Meat. The shot-on-video flick tells a story of a family of deranged cannibals living in a rural area who kidnap teenagers and, you guessed it, try to turn them into meat to sell to a roadside stand. The film features an SUV full of obnoxious teenagers because it's 1987, that's legally required at that point, I would guess, and a family that makes the Sawyers look like the Waltons. And enough VHS tracking issues to make you think your dad's camcorder was having a nervous breakdown. Director Kirk Alex made this for almost no budget, and it shows in pretty much every single frame. We're talking community theater acting, man. Practical effects that consist mainly of store-bought Halloween decorations and probably corn syrup, and a synthesizer soundtrack that sounds like someone sat on a CNC. Say that 3 times. This was actually the last starring role of Kim McCamey, who in a prior video we learned famously refused nude scenes only to go on to become adult film star Ashlyn Gear. But man, did she stack some shot-on videos before she made that transition. The film was barely released, playing mostly at regional horror conventions and VHS trading circles, which gave it that underground mystique that made you feel like a true horror connoisseur for even knowing it existed. the kind of obscure VHS tape you'd brag about owning. Only 2,500 VHS copies were sold, but in its day, that was more than enough to call it an overall success for Shot on Video. Todd Martin of HorrorNews.net reviewed Lunch Meat, stating that the death scenes and the effects were good for the film's limited budget, but that overall the film did not deliver anything new or groundbreaking with the film's premise. And I guess that's fair, but still, this flick's a blast, man. What makes Lunch Meat special isn't its quality. I mean, there really isn't any, but it's pure unfiltered commitment to being exactly what that VHS cover promised. Trashy, tasteless, and totally unapologetic about wasting 88 precious minutes of your life, securing its place among the most notorious shot-on-video slashers of the era.
What's that?
Living onions.
What's that?
Cream squash.
How come they both look the same?
Guys, look, the rest of the movie picks up, trust. Now, the same year they gave us Lunch Meat also blessed us with Forever Evil, a movie whose title sounds like an ironic tagline for a deodorant commercial or an 80s cologne, but actually delivers some genuinely insane demon summoning shenanigans. Forever Evil, for the discerning boy. When a group of friends gather at a remote cabin for a weekend getaway, this isn't Evil Dead, they accidentally unleash an ancient evil that possesses them one by one. It's standard stuff, except this movie gets super kitschy with dialogue so stilted you'd swear the actors are reading cue cards written in a language they literally just learned, and it is fantastic, man.
A hand.
Director Roger Evans convinced actress Tracy Hoffman to run around in torn clothing for most of the runtime, while Howard Jacobson takes stage as the demonic presence, creating this weird mix of supernatural horror and unintentional comedy gold that perfectly captures the shot-on-video horror aesthetic. This was Diane Johnson's, she plays Holly, the shower girl, only role and nude scenes. She was a close friend of screenwriter Freeman Williams, and she was the first person he thought of when they had to find an actress who would perform totally naked for very little money, and that's everyone's criteria. The bulk of the budget likely went to the false torso they had to use for her shower scene, as well as further dream scenes, and man, it's awesome and worth digging up to check out. This was shot on 16mm with what had to be a tiny budget. I couldn't find it anywhere. Forever Evil features ambitious special effects that swing wildly between surprisingly decent and did they just glue rubber to that guy's face? And yeah, they 100% did. The demon makeup actually does hold up in certain scenes, which makes the cheaper moments stand out even more dramatically, like watching a high school play that occasionally breaks into Broadway-level production value for about 10 seconds before returning to cardboard sets. Author John Stanley gave the film a negative review, stating that the film only comes to life with the appearance of a zombie-like creature that cannot be killed, and the efforts of hero and heroine to do the monster in. But man, I always dig the acting in these. Again, the acting's in quotes, and what I hope are ad-libbed, dialogue-filled scenes, because those can't be scripted words. This one circulated heavily in the tape trading community and developed a small cult following among fans who appreciated its earnest attempts to create DIY, like Lovecraftian horror on a budget, complete with metaphysical monologues about eternal darkness delivered by actors clearly wondering if this would help or hurt their careers. The kind of 80s movie clips that still show up in worse acting compilations today. Now, as an aside, if you Google Stomp Tokyo and Bad Movie Report together, you'll get to a site where you can click the word make in the middle of the screen somewhere, and it's an old school webpage dedicated to the making of this flick, written by the guy that wrote this flick, and I would assume directed it. It is a wild read. It goes step by step of everything they did to make this movie. Check it out.
I don't know.
Barry Gillis joins me in the studio now. Barry, for a young man, you're involved in some pretty gory things here. Yeah. Can you tell us about this movie and how you got involved?
All right, gang, it is deep dive time, and we're taking a closer look at Things, because this movie deserves its own special segment. If you thought the basic plot was insane, wait until you hear what went down behind the scenes, because the making of Things is somehow even more chaotic than the actual movie. First off, let's address the budget situation. Barry J. Gillis went on local TV claiming they had $350,000 to make this thing.
How much money in this case for Things?
Well, Things is a very low budget movie, and
People just want to get credits and things like that.
What did the movie cost?
$350,000.
Which would have been pretty respectable for a shot-on-video horror flick. Turns out, though, that's a total lie. Andrew Jordan convinced him to inflate the numbers, hoping it would generate publicity, and Barry went along with it until the DVD release years later when he finally came clean. The real budget was closer to 35 to 40 grand, mostly funded by Jordan's parents who let him shoot in their basement. Yeah, somebody's mom and dad bankrolled this masterpiece of confusion, which honestly makes it even more endearing. Now about Amber Lynn showing up randomly as that news anchor. The filmmaker straight up admitted she was added after they'd already finished principal photography, specifically so they could slap her name and face on the VHS cover to boost sales. They paid her $2,500 for literally 1 hour of her time while she was in Toronto for a whole other project. They filmed it in her hotel room at the time, and she read every single line off cue cards that for some reason were to her side and not in front of her, under or above the camera, and it's just unsettling to watch. That's some guerrilla marketing right there, and honestly, respect. That VHS cover probably moved more units than the actual contents of the tape ever could. The production itself was an absolute disaster, man, as you would expect. Remember that sandwich eating scene that feels weirdly disjointed? And I know finding a disjointed scene in this flick is like fish in a barrel, but that's because they filmed it over several days, since all three actors were never available at the same time, which explains that moment where they're tossing a bottle between each other that looks like it violates the laws of physics. And again, the charm is these guys sitting around coordinating across days to nail this random sandwich eating scene that has zero weight in the overall movie. And it makes you wonder how much they agonize over such classics as "That's not a real fish" and "What's in this cabinet?" and the classic "The waterworks." You gotta wonder. Speaking of that scene, the bug squashing incident wasn't improvised like everyone assumed it was. It was actually based on Andrew Jordan putting an insect in his childhood friend's sandwich, because apparently both he and Doug Bunston were practical jokers who enjoyed messing with people's food. The fact they recreated this for the movie tells you everything about their creative process. Doug Bunston himself is a whole standalone story, man. He was drunk during filming. Providing beer was literally a requirement for him to even show up and act, and I don't have quotes big enough for that word. The dude was supposed to be a co-producer until a week before shooting, when his family forced him to get a real job. So instead, he just became the beer-fueled star. Bruce Roach, who ran the video gore store in Scarborough, could only come to set for limited days, which is why his character randomly disappears via an uncapped bottle of dishwashing detergent filled with fake blood squeezed behind Doug. That's the level of special effects ingenuity we're working with here. And speaking of dangerous moments, Roach was working with a live chainsaw when he slipped on fake blood and cut straight through his jeans. And fortunately it stopped before hitting his skin, but imagine explaining that hospital visit. Yeah, I was making a film called Things, and there were these ant monsters, and I digress. Here's a wild detail about the audio in general. Despite what you might assume watching this train wreck, they actually did record sound during all those dialogue scenes in the house. The problem? They recorded it directly onto Super 8 film, and it was so unbearably loud they had to scrap everything and redub it later. Only one scene near the end uses the original sound. Amber Lynn's 16mm footage was recorded separately and synced up later, which is why nothing in this movie feels like it exists in the same exact reality. Andrew Jordan has admitted he was high on weed almost every day during the editing process, which explains the sloppy editing, poor sound work, and general sense that reality was completely optional. The creatures themselves have their own little backstory. Their green blood was a deliberate homage to the chlorophyll monsters from the Blood Island series, showing these guys actually knew their exploitation cinema history. Bruce Roach kept the last remaining intact thing creature until it was lost in a house fire in the mid-90s. Man, rest in peace with that beautiful nightmare. While special effects artist Glenn Orr held on to the original mechanized creature he lovingly called Irving. Hilariously, Jordan and Gillis easily crossed the Canada-US border multiple times with a human skull from a scientific laboratory that Glenn Orr provided only for the VHS cover photo shoot in Grand Rapids, Michigan. They never even used it in the actual shoot, but they just casually brought a human skull across international borders. And the 80s were a different time, man. Now you couldn't even get a severed toe across, but that's another story. The opening scene featured Jessica Stewart as the nude woman. She was a real-life sex worker, and when they tried to include her in the 2008 DVD release for interviews, they couldn't track her down. There's also a blink and you miss it detail in Doug's dream sequence where he's wearing an Andre the Giant pin on his shirt, and only an eagle eye would pick up on that. Perhaps the most telling detail, Andrew Jordan himself has called making things the worst experience of my life, especially the months of post-production working with Barry J. Gillis, and yet somehow this disaster of a production resulted in a movie that achieved cult status precisely because every single thing that could go wrong did go wrong, and they just kept filming anyway. That's the beauty of things. It's not just a bad movie, it's a monument to determination, delusion, and the absolute refusal to let things like coherence and continuity, or hell, basic filmmaking knowledge stand in the way of your vision. Both Jordan and Gillis went on to make more movies. Barry's currently working on his 5th feature now, proving that nothing, not critical savaging, not public humiliation, man, not even admitting your own movie was torture to make, can stop a true independent filmmaker. And that's honestly more inspiring than any Hollywood success story. This is what the shot-on-video horror movement was all about, man. Pure, unfiltered creative chaos captured on VHS tapes that somehow made it to store shelves and into our wood-paneled basements. Alright gang, that's 6 clamshells of shot-on-video gold that prove our generation had the strongest stomachs and the lowest standards. And honestly, I can't see why we would ever change that. These movies might not have had the budgets of Hollywood's blockbusters or hell, the polish of mainstream 80s horror movies, but they had something more important, man. They had heart. They had guts. Sometimes literally strewn across the set. And they had the absolute conviction that someone, somewhere, would rent them on a Friday night and have the time of their lives. These shot-on-video slashers and supernatural nightmares might not show up on every 80s horror movies list, but they absolutely should. They represent the true DIY spirit of independent horror. Now, what's your favorite obscure shot-on-video horror that nobody else seems to remember? Drop your recommendations in the comments below. We are always looking for the next beautifully terrible shot-on-video nightmare to add to our collection. Thanks for watching all. This was a complete blast. I love you. Stay cool, gang.